Past the hour, joining us now, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Mr. Ambassador, is there any more you can share with us about this peace deal and any concerns you have?
Good morning, Mika. Hi, Joe. Good to be with you as always. I'm listening. Very distinguished panel. Very impressive. I think everyone's missing the point. And it's this. Everyone's talking about the pressure put by Trump on Netanyahu, pressure put on Trump on Netanyahu. It's missing the point. The 20-point plan developed by Steve Witkoff with Jared Kushner is one of the most elegant pieces of diplomacy we can remember in recent years. It's overwhelmingly pro-Israel. It addresses all of Israel's war aims and only has one timetable in it, and that is 72 hours to release all the hostages. Other than that, it militarizes Gaza. It takes the guns away from Hamas. It exiles Hamas leaders and opens the way to a better future. And what does Israel have to give in return? Withdrawal, clearly, but also and release of some security prisoners from our prisons, which is painful. But the other concessions are to talk about some future pathway to a Palestinian state. And pathway is a very obscure term. Pathway could be with gravel, and to talk about maybe some role for a reformed Palestinian Authority in the future governance of Gaza. The major pressure here was not on Israel. It was pushing out an open door. The major pressure is on Hamas. And these leaders in the Middle East have had it with Hamas. Hamas brought war to the Middle East, instability, destruction. And what begins with Israel-Palestine never ends with Israel-Palestine. It ends up with riots in the streets of Riyadh and Cairo. And they were fed up, and they wanted it over. And that is the extraordinary achievement here of bringing all of these disparate states together who don't agree with one another, and certainly not with Israel, to end the war by putting pressure on Hamas. And that is a tremendous difference between anything that proceeded during the Biden administration. And that was predicated on America's willingness to use force in the Middle East, friends. You don't bring peace without power. And President Trump demonstrated again and again, first with the Houthis and then with Iran, that he was willing to exercise power. And that gets you a lot of credibility in the Middle East.
Mr. Ambassador, first of all, thank you for taking time out to correct David Ignatius and the rest of us. Reminds me of a line, Mr. Ambassador, it reminds me of a line in broadcast news where the star is asked, it must be wonderful to be right all the time when everybody else is wrong, and Holly Hunter breaks down and cries and says, no, it's terrible. So that's the burden you carry. I want to talk about, though, David Ignatius did say a few days ago that this 20-point plan, in effect, amounted to a surrender by Hamas. So, you know what? We'll give you a point there. Let's give the ambassador a point on the board right there. You talk about an elegant solution here, and I want to walk through that, where Jared Kushner writes, along with Steve Witkoff, this 20-point plan, which, of course, came because the Qataris were talking to us, and they were trying to figure out how do we negotiate a way to peace. And I think it was Kushner who decided we're not going to negotiate our way to peace. We're going to do a 20-point plan. You're going to present this to Hamas. We're going to present it to Israel, and we're going to get it done. It was pretty fascinating at that point that they understood negotiations would be protracted. This was, in effect, a 20-point plan, which for Hamas, for the most part, amounted to a surrender document, right?
Exactly. My point. It's a very, I don't want to say it's a pro-Israel document, but it does address all of Israel's war aims. It's going to be supported even within the Israeli government. It's going to approve it today.
And Mr. Ambassador, not to interrupt you, but it also, not only does it support Israel's war aims, it also supports the reality on the ground. And that is Hamas is battered, bruised. It is a spent force. And most importantly, it's isolated even throughout the Middle East with its Arab neighbors.
And why is that, Joe? Because Israel used force. And because Israel used force backed by the United States. It's unpleasant. War is horrible. I've been in several. And I'll tell you, but without the use of force, this 20 points would not have been possible. And the use of force, not just against Hamas, but also against Iran. The President Trump was willing to step up and project American power. What's missing, I think, from the conversation this morning is the restoration, the revival of the Pax Americana after years of withdrawal and isolationism in the Middle East. And that, I think, is truly maybe the most historic consequence of these 20 points of this agreement. Now, having said all that, this is maybe the end of the beginning. Hamas still has its guns. Hamas is still embedded in Gaza. Houthis are still firing. Iran is now rebuilding. The war may be far from over, but the fact is that these hostages are returning, and that was Israel's major war aim. It is an extraordinary achievement for which the people of Israel, and as a father and grandfather, I'll tell you, we're deeply indebted to Donald Trump.
David, certainly that goal of the hostages being returned seems to be, fingers crossed, achieved in the next few days. But we shouldn't lose sight of the terrible toll. Civilians in Gaza, women, children, and, of course, so many hostages who didn't make it out. But certainly the region has changed dramatically since October 7th, 2 years ago. Give us your assessment, just a broad step back here as the state of play in the Middle East. And do you believe that the best way for real peace would be that two-state solution? Does this 20-point plan, is that a step along that journey?
It's a beginning. If we're honest, we have to admit that a Palestinian state is still far in the distance, but it is a beginning. I think the contribution that the Trump team has made here, Ambassador Oren, is thinking and pushing on the day after what kind of transitional arrangement would be made in Gaza to move beyond this situation of what seemed a war that couldn't be ended. It just went on. And as you know better than I, many Israelis even a year ago felt that the military objectives had been achieved. The question I want to put to you is the one that I find I worry about most, and that's the disarmament of Hamas. A key part of President Trump's 20-point plan, essential to Israel, is that Hamas will no longer have military or political power. Do you think in the coming weeks and months, Hamas actually will disarm? And if not, is Israel going to have to go back to war?
It's a great question. It's the key question, David. Giving up arms, surrendering, goes against the DNA of Hamas. It's what they're about. It's basically asking them to negate their own identity. And it's a difficult climb. And they won't do it peacefully. They don't go peacefully into that dark night, certainly. And now Hamas is trying to parse it. They'll say, listen, we'll give up our guns. We want to keep our defensive weapons. Or we'll give up our rockets, but we want to keep our Kalashnikovs. And the Trump administration is going to have to step in very, very strongly again. Not with the Israelis, but with the Qataris and the Turks, who are very, very close to Hamas, and say, no, this can't be. And everyone's talking about an international force which is supposed to go into Gaza. That's another part of the 20 points. But that force is not going to go into Gaza if Hamas still has its guns. So everything, that is really the linchpin of what happens next. Can Hamas be effectively disarmed? 20 points talk about Hamas people who then you had mentioned it, David, that there would be an amnesty for the Hamas people who give up terror. There's some kind of pledge they're supposed to make. I don't know what the wording of that pledge means or how it would read, but that is the key to everything that comes next.
Elizabeth B. Miller, you may have a question for the ambassador, but my thought also would be, what does Gaza look like in the years to come so far in this plan?
You're asking me or the ambassador?
You, and you can take it to the ambassador.
Well, that's a good question. I was going to ask the ambassador as well. What the goal of Israel was always the total destruction of Hamas, and that clearly is not about to happen. So that would be my next question too: is where does Hamas go after this? Is it that they're just going to, following up on David, are they just going to go peacefully into the night and that's the end of it? Because of the devastation in Gaza and so many civilians and killed, how can they just walk away from this?
Well, I don't know if they're going to have a choice. What they want to do, Elizabeth, is have a Hezbollah-like situation. They want to have their guns, but not retain any of the sovereign responsibilities. They don't want to come out of the tunnels and be responsible for rebuilding Gaza. And denying them that option will be a major objective of American diplomacy in even the days to come. And it won't be easy. Now, Hamas can say, okay, we're going to be part of a technocratic government in Gaza. We're going to give up our guns. I still think that goes against their DNA. They will not go quietly into that night. I have suggested in the past that we revisit what President Reagan did in the early 80s when Israel laid siege to Beirut. We let PLO leader Yasser Arafat and his major armed force get on guns, get on ships and go off to Tunis. The Hamas leaders can get on a ship and go to Algeria. They can go to Turkey or elsewhere and leave the majority of their rank and file behind. And perhaps they can have some role in the future governance of Gaza, though not as an armed force. And that's going to be, again, that's going to be key. The rebuilding of Gaza is a tremendous opportunity for the people of Gaza, for the region. Gaza can be, and has been, by the way, in previous centuries, a tremendously successful and influential and lucrative port. It's literally the link between continents, and the future there can be very, very promising indeed.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm a great admirer of your book, Power, Faith, and Fantasy, about the relationship between America and the Middle East. If you were having to add a chapter at this hour, what do you think how proportionate is this moment and the American role in what's unfolding right now?
Well, thank you. Thank you, John, for mentioning my book. I'm a great fan of all your books. My book, of course, is available at famously reduced prices now. A very large book from 2006 called Power, Faith, and Fantasy. And it basically says that the American involvement in the Middle East since 1776 has followed three patterns. It's power, usually military power, economic power, faith, democratic faith, but also Christian faith, and fantasy. The fantasy that someday the Middle East will look like the United States of the Middle East, with the Middle Eastern George Washington. And what I would have to rewrite the chapter of the recent years was that the power factor had disappeared, that you had administrations like the Biden administration, like the Obama administration, were unwilling to exert power in the Middle East for all sorts of reasons. And by the way, it wasn't just a Democratic Party. The Republican Party at times was vying with the Democrats, which could be more isolationist in the world. And what I mentioned earlier is now the United States is back exerting power in the Middle East. It is the B-2 bombers bombing Fort Al. It is the American naval forces taking out missiles that are aimed at Israel or taking on the Houthis. And that power has given this administration leverage that previous administrations didn't have. President Biden, for all his good intentions, said don't. Everyone remembers President Biden saying don't, and everybody did. Israel did, the Palestinians did, the Iranians did, because everyone realized that the United States was unwilling to flex muscle. And in the Middle East, you flex muscle and you get leverage in peace negotiations, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and of course, you brought up the Biden administration, who worked on this day in and day out for quite some time. Talk about the Obama administration. Of course, remember Bush 43 and that administration early on saying we're just not going to try to drag the Israelis and the Palestinians to the peace table. If they don't want peace, we're not going to waste our time with it. So you are right. Both parties, Mr. Ambassador, saying enough. But yeah, things have changed. I want you really briefly before we go to break, because we have a big Yankees segment we have to get to as Red Sox fans. But before we go to break, I'm a big believer in experience. I get so sick and tired of people coming to Washington going, oh, I've never been around Washington, I'm a CEO, or I'm a... No, experience matters. It matters a great deal. We can look at Bush 41 and see that at the end of the Cold War. Talk about Jared Kushner's experience with the Abraham Accords and how that laid the pathway. And, of course, Donald Trump. He was working on behalf of Donald Trump. But talk about how, actually, in this case, one example of Donald Trump telling somebody, go, get this done. In fact, and don't come back until it's done. Talk about how the Abraham Accords laid the pathway to this morning where there is hope that the hostages will be freed.
Well, again, go back to this theory of the theme that peace through strength. George Bush Sr. goes to war in the Middle East, and he has the Madrid Peace Conference. George Bush Jr. goes to war in the Middle East, and he has the Annapolis Peace Conference. And these are bringing many different countries together to talk about peace because America was willing to use force. To have that, again, the Abraham Accords were forged because there was a president who made the impression that America was willing to exert power the countries that signed the Abraham Accords signed them not because they love the state of Israel. Their leaders don't get up in the morning and sing, Hatikva, our national anthems. They stood up because Israel was fighting the two major foes of all of these countries, which was Islamic extremism from the Sunni camp and Islamic extremism from the Shiite camp, Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. And the United States was backing that. Though, in addition to exerting power in the Middle East, it's personal relations. And David, you know that 90% of diplomacy, like almost everything else in life, is personal relations. And Jared Kushner succeeded in establishing personal relations with every single leader in the region. And he was able to capitalize that, to harness those personal relationships and bringing together these 20 points, which frankly astonished me. Can't think of any other document in recent memory where so many disparate interests in the Middle East were brought together around a very complicated issue and putting together a blueprint, which everybody agrees on. And even the Israeli right, for the most part, agreed with it. And that is an extraordinary accomplishment. And John, someday you and I are going to be writing about this.
All right, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, thank you for coming on this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Presidential historian John Meacham, thank you as well.